Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud Bet of Menachot. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. We are at the Mishnah at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Bet, and the Mishnah is continuing. The Mishnah introduces various intentions that result in a mincha being invalid and potentially even result in the punishment of karet. Of course, our opening Mishnah introduced this topic when we talked about various things being shalol lishma, that it's not, with an intention not specifically for that particular sacrifice. And we talked about how two different sacrifices have that as a problem, namely the mincha offerings of a sota or a sinner. And so those two situations, if you have the wrong intention, we saw that they are going to be invalid. But every other mincha offering, it will be valid. It just won't count for its purpose. And again, we had the explanation in that original Mishnah that that was only with respect to the personal minchas. But in any event, the bottom line is now we're going to talk about a variety of other ways that the mincha can be problematic. So let's take a look. And again, as a background, as a reminder, there are four steps to the mincha offering. First, you have everything in a bowl, in one kli race, and the lavona is on top of it, and that's sort of like the beginning, and that doesn't even count as a step. The first step is to take a kometz. You do the kamitza, where you do. That's what we learned about yesterday. You stick your hand in vertically, your right hand in vertically. You curl your middle three fingers around the doughy mixture, and then you use your pinky and your thumb to level it all off. And what's left is your kometz in your hand. That's step one. Step two is you put that kometz into a new vessel, and that's step two. Step three is that new vessel is brought to the altar, and step four is that the kometz is then put on the altar and burned, and that putting it on the altar and burning it is what then permits the shirayim, the rest of the leftover of the what's left in the big original bowl from the dough. That's what permits that dough to be eaten. So those are the steps of it. And when we talk about those four steps, the question is what is your intention during those four steps? So let's take a look. So hakometz es hamincha le'echol shiareha b'chutz. If when you do the original kamitza, you have in mind that you're going to eat the leftover parts outside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, and I should note that the shirayim that gets eaten, it must be eaten inside the courtyard. So you're going to be eating it outside its location, outside the proper location. O kizayas mishiyareha b'chutz. Or even if you weren't going to eat all of it outside, you say you're going to eat part of it outside as long as it's an olive size or larger. So then also the rule is going to apply. Lahaktir kumtza b'chutz. Or you say you're going to burn it outside, meaning the burning that you're going to do. O kizayas kumtza b'chutz, or at least a kazayas of it is going to be burned outside. O lahaktir levona sabachutz, or you're going to burn the lavona outside. Now, when it comes to the lavona, it doesn't say anything about kazayas. There, Rashi comes to our rescue and tells us what the story is and why it doesn't say anything about the kazayas. So let's take a look. In the middle of Rashi, it's going to be 6 lines up from the bottom of Rashi on Yud Aleph Amud Bet, middle of the line, where it says V'i Kasha. If you have a question, Amai lo tananami kazayas milavonasa. Why didn't it reference the fact that you also deal with a kazayas of lavona? So taritzach. The answer is the following: Stama and the chet there, the little chet there, refers to the Masoros Shas, and it should be not Kirabanan, but rather Kirabi Shimon. That this Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon. To Amri La'el that we saw earlier, to Levona Kashera Bekoret Echad, Hilkach Lo Tana Kazayat. That's why it said that you don't have any Kazayat, because even one particle is going to be sufficient to be kosher, and so even one particle to be burned outside would be problematic, and so that is the explanation. And so what happens if any of those is true? Again, any of five different things. You either intend to eat the entire kamitza out, the entire shirayim outside. You intend to eat an olive amount of the shirayim outside. You intend to burn the komets outside. You intend to burn at least an olive amount of the komets outside, or you intend to burn the lavona outside the courtyard. In any of those cases, pasul the ein bo karet. The sacrifice is no longer valid, but you are not punished with the punishment of kares. Le'achol shireha l'machar. If, on the other hand, you intend instead of eating it outside the place, you intend to eat it outside the proper time, as Rashi says, l'machar, 4 lines up in the Rashi. Dahainu chutz l'zmano. That's outside the proper time. De mincha eina necheles el yom v'layla. Because a mincha, as one of the holy sacrifices, is only edible for one day and one night. So tomorrow it's no longer good after sunrise. V'idkish l'chatas v'asham. And how we know that is because of the connection to chatas v'asham. Because the Torah says, with respect to the mincha in Vayikra Perek Vav Pasuk Yud, it says kachatas v'kasham, that it's like the sin offering and the asham offering. And then Rashi continues, v'chatas v'asham amar b'toras kohanim gabi toda minayan l'rabos chatas v'asham. How do I know that you're supposed to include that the rule with respect to Toda, which you eat just for that day and that night, also applies to the Chatas and the Asham? To Yochel B'Yom Karbano, because you have to eat it in the day that it's sacrificed. Talmud Lomar Zevach Ubasar Zevach Toda Shlamav. That the word Zevach tells us that it's not just about the Toda, but it also applies to the Chatas and Asham, and from the Chatas and Asham, we learn to the Mincha. And so as a result, you're only supposed to have it for one day, and so as a result, if you intend to eat the remainder outside of the right time, meaning tomorrow, or you intend to eat one kazayas of the remainder the next day, or you intend to burn the komets the next day, or a kazayat of the, or an olive size of the komets you intend to burn the next day. Or you intend to burn the lavona the next day. And again, we don't reference a kazayas. Again, Rashi would explain that it's because we're following Rabbi Shimon. Well then, pigol v'chayavin alav kares. That is the definition of pigol. Pigol, again, is when you try to do something outside the proper time, and that will be pigol, and you will be subject to being cut off from the Jewish people. You'll be subject to the punishment of kares. Zeklal, here's the general rule. So, kol hakometz, if you do the kamitza, onosein bekli, or you put it in a vessel, hamolich, or you take it to the mizbeach, hamaktir, or you burn it on the mizbeach, and you do any of those things with the intention le'echol davar shedarko le'echol, to eat something whose intention is to eat, meaning who's supposed to be eaten, ulahaktir davar shedarko lahaktir, or to burn something whose that is supposed to be burned. Chutz limkomo, if you do it with an intention about doing it outside the right place, pasul ve'ein bo kares. That's not pigul, that's just pasul. It is invalid, and you don't get kares. But chutz lizmano, if you do any of those things with an intention with respect to the eating or the burning that would be outside the right time, pigul v'chayavin alav kares, it's pigul and you're subject to the penalty of kares with the following qualification. Uvilvad sheyakriv hamater kamitzvaso. As we saw in Zvachim, you need to do it. The rest of the sacrifice needs to be done in a way where it, as the language here is, so long as the what is going to permit is going to be brought in the way that it was commanded to be brought. Meaning that, as let's take a look at Rashi, ubilvaji ekarav hamatir kamitzvah sub ki'ilu haya kasher. Everything else needs to be done to it as if it was a kosher sacrifice. Shelo yehe shum psul ela hapigul. There cannot be any other problem besides the existence of pigul. Aval im yesham psul acher. If there were some other problem besides pigul, tulo pagil, then it's no longer going to be considered pigul. Ve'ein bo kares, and therefore there won't be any kares. Kedamar beperak bet, as we are going to see in a few days on Daf Tet Zayin Mabet, Yeratzeh ksiv bepigul. The word Yeratzeh, it actually is lo Yeratzeh, but Yeratzeh is written in connection with the pigul, the ksiv bekasher, and when it comes to a kosher sacrifice, it says Yeratzeh. Kartzos kasher, kachartzos pigul. Basically, the acceptability of a kosher has to be also true with respect to the pigul, other than the pigul thought itself. Shelo yehe shum psul acher. There cannot be any other invalidity. So, back into the Mishnah. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down now on Yud Bet Amud Aleph. So, Ketzad Karav Hamater Kamitzvah. So, what do you mean by that? The Gemara, the Mishnah here goes into a detail. Kamatz b'shtika, if you did the kmitza in silence, and Rashi tells us shelo chishev, you didn't do any thought. And of course, here when it says a thought, it means an improper thought. If you didn't do any improper thought, and then nasan, back in the Gemara, nasan bekli beholech behiktir chutz lizmano, and you put it in the vessel, or you took it to the mizbeach, or you burned it with the intention to do the consumption outside the time. And of course, the hiktir, once you burn it, you can't do you can't have in mind to have the katara outside of time, but you could also imagine that you put it in the vessel, or you took it to the mizbeach with the intention to burn it outside its right time. So that would be one set. O shekamatz chutz lizmano, or you do the kamitza with the intention to burn it or to eat it outside the right time. Nasan bekliva holok vehiktir b'shtika, and you did all the other 3 steps in silence. Oshakamatz v'nasan bekliva holok vehiktir chutz lizmano, or you did all 4 steps with the intention to consume it outside the regular time. Zeu shekarav hamater kamitzvah. So, in all of those cases, the korban has been brought with all the other elements like they are supposed to. Meaning that, and Rashi points this out. Take a look at Rashi. Osha kometz v'nasan bekliva hola v'hiktir. Kol ela. Even if you were to do all 4 steps, chutz lizmano, with an intention to consume the shirayim outside of the proper time, meaning tomorrow, zeu shekarav hamatir kamitzvah so. This is bringing the permitter in the way it was commanded. Delo hayabo shum psul acher, because there's no other violation. There's no other invalidity. Now, you would have done the same invalidity 4 different times, because you had in mind when you did the kamitza, you would have in mind when you did the putting it in the vessel, and you had in mind when you did the bringing to the mizbeach, and you had in mind when you did the burning. So you had it in mind 4 different times. One could have thought, well, if you do the psul, if you do the action, or have the thought, namely, that causes something to become pigul and you do it multiple times, maybe one doing it again invalidates the pigul that you already had. The answer is no. If you do the same invalidity four different times with respect to being outside the correct time, that's going to still be considered pigul, and you will still be subject to, one would still be subject to kares.
Oh, wow.
All right. So Ketzad lo karav hamatir kemitzvah. So what's the situation where you don't bring the permitter in the way it was commanded? Meaning, how can I avoid the kares? Well, here's how. Kamatz chutzlim komo. If I think about when I'm doing the kamitza, I think about eating it outside the right place or burning it outside the right place, and then nasan bekliva holo v'higdar chutz mano. But then when I do the other three steps, I have a pigul thought with respect to them. So, shekamatz chutz mano, or I have the pigul thought with respect to the kamitza, and nasan bekliva holo v'higdar chutz komo, and I have the thought with respect to being outside the place for all three of the other steps. Shekamatz nasan b'kli v'holach v'hikder chutzlim komo, or I have all four steps I do outside the right place. And Rashi explains we don't really mean you do all four, because then why would you ever think that you would be subject to pigul? So he says, shekamatz v'nasan b'kli v'holach v'hikder kol eile chutzlim komo. We're basically a little bit just below the midpoint of the narrow lines in Rashi. Kolomar, Ktani. It really should say, or with respect to all four of these, that im asa achat me'ela almanas le'ekol shirayim chutzlim komo. If you did any of the four with the intention to eat the leftover pieces outside the right place, the kol hagimel, and the remainder three, chutz lizmano, you have in mind the wrong time, lo karav hakometz. So that would not be considered bringing the permitter in the proper way. And the Gemara, back into the Gemara, that's the next words of the Gemara, zeu shelo karav matir kemitzvah. So that is the situation of not bringing the permitter in the proper way. We're now at the Dalid in the Gemara. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 lines down in the Gemara. So minchas chote. So what about a minchas chote and minchas kanos? As we said at the very beginning of today's shir, those are the two where if you have in mind the wrong sacrifice, where you bring them not for their own sake, but for the sake of a different sacrifice, they are not valid. How does those bad thoughts impact whether or not pigul happens? Well, those bad thoughts would also eliminate pigul. Minchas chote u minchas kenos shekamatzon shelo lishman. If you did the kamitza with the wrong sacrifice intended, so nasan bekli v'holach v'hikter chutz l'smanu, and you did the other three with the pigul intention, o shekamatz chutz l'smanu, or you did the kamitza with the pigul intention, nasan bekli v'holach v'hikter shelo lishman, and you did the other three not with the wrong sacrifice intention. Or you did all four is the literal translation, but again, Rashi would say it means any of the four, and you do the other three with the pigul intention. So that's again another example where you did not bring the permitter in the way that was required, and so as a result, you are going to say that it is invalid sacrifice, but you are not subject to the penalty of kares. So le'echol kazayas b'chutz kazayas l'machar. If you intend, so now we back up and we say, what if you have two intentions at effectively the same time? You say, I'm going to eat a kazayas outside, and I'm going to eat a kazayas the next day. Or kazayas l'machar, kazayas b'chutz. Or I say I'm going to eat a kazayas out tomorrow, and I'm going to eat a kazayas outside the right place. So, or kachatzi zayas b'chutz, v'kachatzi zayas l'machar. I do half and half. I say I'm going to do half a kazayas outside the right place and half a kazayas outside the right time. So, namely tomorrow. Or kachatzi zayas lemachar, but kachatzi zayas b'chutz. I do it in the reverse order. I think I'm going to do the half of an olive outside the right time, namely tomorrow, and I think I'm going to do half a kazayas outside the right place. In all four of those cases, pasol ve'ein bo kares. It's invalid, and the big chiddush here is that we will add the invalidity of pigul to the invalidity of doing it outside the right place, and to create a full olive worth of invalidity, and so the sacrifice becomes totally invalid, even though you're combining two sort of different prohibitions, and yet, but because you haven't only done pigul, you are not going to be subject to kares. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Ze'aklal, here's the rule. Imachsheves hazman kadma lemachsheves hamakom. If the thought about the wrong time comes first. So, for example, if you think kizayas lemachar, kizayas bachutz, well then pigul v'chayavin alav kares. It would be pigul because you had the thought about the wrong time before you had the wrong thought about the wrong place, and so it immediately became pigul. And once it becomes pigul, we're not going to say that a different invalidity would undermine the pigul quality. So as a result, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in that case, it would be pigul, and you would be subject to kares. However, if you think about the wrong place first, well, then it's going to already be invalid and not be subject to kares. Well, then pasul ve'ein bo kares. When you now think about the pigul thought, it's going to not be subject to kares. The chachamim omrim, and the chachamim say, as we saw earlier in our Mishnah, zeh v'zeh pasul ve'ein bo kares. Doesn't make a difference what the order is. If you have a pigul thought and you want to escape the punishment of kares, just think a different thought that would also result in it being invalid, and you will escape the punishment of kares. Okay, so that is our Mishnah. Let me scroll because I realize it did not.
So the previous case with there are four of them, the Rashi goes through, they separate them. So does one have to accomplish all four of them for it to be pigul, or either any one of them?
So if you do any one of them, it's pigul if you don't have any other improper thought. So in the first case, when we talked about the thought about outside the right time, Rashi explained when the Mishnah says you did all four, it means you did any one of the four. And then when it comes to either having the wrong intention as to place, and it says that you did all four with the wrong place intended, and so as a result, the situation would be you would not be subject to kares, and it would not be pigul. Rashi explains that it's talking about where you did any one of the four with the wrong place in mind, and so as a result, even if the other three were with the wrong time involved in mind, it would still not be pigul because you had at least one of them with the wrong place in mind.
Wrong place, right.
And then similarly, when it comes to having in mind the wrong sacrifice, when it comes to the sota and the sinner's mincha, so then if you, again, even though it said that you had the wrong sacrifice in mind at all four steps, it again really means that at any one of those four steps you had the wrong sacrifice in mind. And even though at the other three steps you had the wrong time in mind, and therefore it should be pigul, it would still not be pigul because at one of them you had the wrong sacrifice in mind. And so as a result, the sacrifice would have been considered invalid. Okay?
And therefore there'd be no pigul.
And therefore there would be no pigul. That's exactly right.
But in the first case, it seemed that it could be pigul if any one of those.
That's right, because at the other three steps, you didn't have any kind of bad thought. And so as a result, you did everything else in the appropriate way. If you have the bad thought, the pigul thought with respect to kamitza, the natan b'kli, hakrava, or the burning, haktara, if you have that bad thought with respect to any of those four, that's enough for pigul. If you think that you're going to do it outside the right time, that's enough for pigul, as long as the other three don't
Hmm.
have any psol associated with it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now the Gemara addresses whether a mincha that can be brought but not eaten. Okay, we saw this a few days ago that there's sometimes where, for example, if you have the shirayim and some of the shirayim disappear before you burn the comets. So you have the you've taken the comets and everything was done fine, but now somehow some of the what was in the original bowl has spilled out, and so as a result, it's lost. And we're going to say that as a result, you're never going to be able to eat that shirayim. And according to one opinion we saw, you still will bring the comates. And the comates will have an effect because if you were to use the shirayim, you at least won't be subject to me'ila. But you still can't eat it. So we've been talking about the situation where in order for something to be subject to pigul, you need to bring the matir in the proper way. Well, what about this in between situation? Is that considered in the proper way? After all, it's not a true matir because you can't eat the shirayim because the shirayim got lost. And if it's but on the other hand, it's not a true psul situation because you're still allowed to bring the comates. So that's the question. Ibailahu ledivrei haomer, according to the opinion that says shirayim shechasru ben kamitza lahaktara. If the leftover flour dough situation that was in the original container, it became some of it got missing. So makdir komets aleihin. We said that you can still, according to the view that says you can still bring the komates and burn the komates. The kaimelan to otan shirayim asurin ba'achila, and we said that those leftover shirayim that are now missing some are going to be forbidden to be eaten. So ma'udetehani lahu haktara. Is that kind of burning going to be effective? Limikabeinu the pigul. If you had an original pigul thought when you did the kamitza, and now at the time that you're doing the haktara, you have proper thoughts, but some of the shirayim is missing, and so you're not going to be able to eat the shirayim as a result of your doing the haktara. Do we say vilapikinu midei meila? It does remove it from being subject to meila, so there is an aspect of it being permitted, but you're not allowed to eat it, so it's aspect of it still being prohibited. So is that considered bringing the permitted in the commanded way, or is it not? So we're going to have two approaches. First, Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna, afilu Rabbi Akiva de Amar Zrika Ma'oeles liyotze. According to Rabbi Akiva, he says that if when it comes to a sacrifice whose edible parts have been brought outside the courtyard when they're not allowed to be, so we're talking about some kind of holier sacrifice, so you still are going to throw the blood and eliminate the penalty of me'ilah. Hani mile yotze. That's only true when the sacrifice has gone out. Deise beine, because even though it left, it's still fully in existence. And so therefore, although it's in the wrong place and you won't be able to eat it, it's going to still be enough, kosher enough, so to speak, that you need to burn the burned parts of the sacrifice, and we're going to say that there's no me'ila by it. Upasel machmas davar acherhu. It's going to only be invalid because it's in the wrong location, because not because of something about itself. Aval chisaron. When there's a deficiency, it's not about its location. It itself is improper. De psula de gufehu, that's going to be an invalidity that is directly connected to the offering itself. Lo mahanile mahaktara. According to Rav Huna, even Rabbi Akiva would say that the burning doesn't work, and therefore, if you were to have, when it comes to this example, we would say it's not pigul. It's not pigul because you would even it's not going, the burning the comates does not eliminate the Me'ila penalty, and therefore there is no aspect. You certainly can't eat the leftovers. There is no aspect of a permitter being brought because you're not permitting anything. Yes, you still have to burn that comets in on the altar, but it doesn't actually permit anything, and therefore we don't have the qualification of the pigul, which is that you have to bring a permitter in a proper way. And here there's nothing that's being permitted, and therefore it won't be pigul. So Amrle Rava, Adarabba, I would tell you just the opposite. I can give you an argument that says that actually we are bringing a permitter, and even afilu Rabbi Eliezer to Amr Ains Rika Moelis Yotze, even the Rabbi Eliezer, he says that you don't actually burning the sacrifice is not even going to help you with respect to Me'ila. And of course, obviously, it's not going to help you with respect to eating, but it's not going to help you with respect to Me'ila. And therefore, it's not going to be, when it comes to a regular animal sacrifice, it's not going to be subject to pigul. So, Hani Mili Yotze. But that's only true because the meat that you were going to eat has left the courtyard. Bifnim. There's nothing inside. Aval chisaron. But when you have something that's deficient and it's just missing a bit, to ise bifnim, it's still in the right location. So mahanya haktara. Maybe even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that burning would eliminate the penalty of me'ilah. So Amarava, Mina Minallah. And how do I know that this is true? I'm going to derive it from our Mishnah. Ditnan. Hakometz as a mincha. Now, I will pause here to note that this drasha that we're about to do is a little complicated. So stick with me and then we'll follow it all together. Okay? Ditnan. Hakometz as a mincha le'achol shiareha b'chutz o kazayis m'shiareha b'chutz. In our Mishnah, we noted that the prohibition of the prohibition of eating outside doesn't only apply to eating outside the entire remnants, but even eating outside a kazayas of the remnants. Now, there could be two reasons why you would eat outside the kazayas of the remnants. And that they are, one, because you are only having in mind one kazayas of a much larger amount that is left, or you could have in mind that you're eating a kazayas because that's all that's left, because some of it got eliminated. Vitani Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia, when he taught this, when he taught a brisa that was essentially teaching the same lesson of the Mishnah, Hakomet as a mincha, he only focused on the person who's doing kamitza and having in mind eating all of it. Velotani o kazayas. He did not learn about a kazayas volume amount. And why didn't he? My time lotani o kazayas. Why didn't he teach that piece of it? Lav kagon shechasru shirayim v'kamulahu akazayas. Isn't it because one possible read of that is that all that was left was one kazayas, and therefore and he didn't want to imply that in fact having in mind to eat one kazayas that's left would be sufficient. The kevan to bimatan kli behiluch v'akatara lo matanele, and since he didn't want to teach about doing the latter steps of the bringing of the comets to the altar, the putting it in the kli, the bringing it to the altar, and the burning. He didn't want to teach about those because presumably they would not be valid if they were done if only one olive was left. O kazayas ashirayim. B'kamitza nami le'achol shirayim lo tani o kazayas. And so as a result, he also didn't teach that case. Now, what is that? How does that prove anything? So here's how to prove something. The Katani Seifa, and yet at the end of our Mishnah, or a later part in our Mishnah, we said Pigol v'chayavin alav kares, that if you had in mind the thought with respect to the shirayim of one olive doing it outside the right time, it would be kares. So alma mahanya lahu haktara. That shows that when you have even one olive volume left in the shirayim, it would show that pigel would be true. And so as a result, that shows the specific intention is to show that in our Mishnah, it would actually indicate that it would be pigel because our Mishnah notes that having in mind to eat even the shirayim outside the right time, when it's even just an olive, and we say that when we say that you're eating the shirayim, it could even mean when all you have left is one olive. It shows that you have pigel, and that pigel is effective. So Amar le Abaye, Abaye says, Rava, I don't agree with you. Lo, no, I don't think that that's how you necessarily have to understand the brisa that was taught by Rabbi Chia. Hamani Rabbi Elazar. Maybe that brisa is following Rabbi Elazar. Because what does Rabbi Elazar say? Ditnan, we learn in Zvachim near the end of the Masechet, in Daf Kuf Tet Amud Aleph, Amud Bet, excuse me, a kometz, if you take a kamitza, the halavona, I mean, if you have a kometz of a mincha, the halavona, or you have the lavona, the haketoras, or you have some ketoras, uminchas kohanim, or you have the mincha that kohanim bring when they offer the service the first day, uminchas kohen mashiach, or you have the mincha that the kohen gadol brings every day, uminchas nesachim, or you have a libation offering. Shehikriv me'achas mehen kezayis b'chutz, and you done go and you bring these sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash, because the context of that perek was telling us all the different prohibitions about bringing things outside the Beis Hamikdash. Chayav, you are liable for having brought a true sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash. For Rabbi Elazar poter, but Rabbi Elazar says no, you're not liable. Why? Ad sheyakriv es kulo. It's not enough to bring one kazayas. You have to bring the entire amount. And so as a result, maybe when Rabbi Elazar was, maybe when Rabbi Chia was quoting that brisa, where it says, where he doesn't reference an olive volume, it's because he's following Rabbi Elazar's teaching. And Rabbi Elazar says that you need all of it in order to violate, meaning it's not a valid sacrifice unless it's all done. So kevan de bahaktaris kamitza lo matni le okazayas mikumtza b'chutz. The point is that that brisa is following Rebbe Lazar, and it can't teach that when it comes to burning the komets about having an olive's volume of komets outside, because that or b'shirayim nami lo matni le okazayas. And when it comes to the shirayim, it also is not going to teach about an olive's volume outside, because when it comes to Rebbe Lazar, if you don't have in mind that you're going to do the whole thing, it's not going to be pigol or usser, because only when you have in mind with respect to the whole amount is there going to be a violation. So in second, though, Rabbi Elazar, if in fact it's Rabbi Elazar that the brisa is like, Hai lahaktir kumtza, it shouldn't be talking about the plan to burn the komets outside alone. Lahaktir kumtza ulavonasa mibaile. It should have said that you're burning the komets and the lavona. As we saw yesterday, when the komets gets burned, it's burned with all the lavona that came with it. And so as a result, shouldn't if the Rebbe Chia was trying to follow Rebbe Lazar, it should have referenced burning the kamitza with the lavona. So we go. So Tanan, as we have in another Mishnah, hakometz v'halavona shehikriv es echad mehen bachutz. Chayav, when it comes, again, this is a Mishnah at the end of Zvachim, telling us about the prohibition of bringing sacrifices outside the Beis Hamikdash, where it says that if you bring either the komets or the lavona, according to the Tanakama, you're going to be liable, because bringing one is sufficient. But Rabbi Elazar, Poter, Rabbi Elazar says, no, you're exempt from bringing it ad sheyakra b'shneim. You have to do both, because only if you do both are you going to be liable for bringing the sacrifice. And so similarly, only if you do both, only if you have in mind to do both outside the proper time or outside the proper place, is there going to be a problem. So lo nitzrucha el kometz the minchas chotei. All right, you know what? We can say that the brisa that Rabbi Chia was quoting and that we're attributing to Rabbi Lazar is actually about the sinner's mincha. And what do we know about the sinner's mincha? We know that there is no lavona associated with it. And so Abaye has outlined a possible explanation that is contradicting what Rava offered. The couple tana la'ashmi'inan kometz the minchas chote. But second, though, why would somebody go to the trouble of teaching about the kometz of a sinner's mincha? They would. V'chein ki also Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Lazar kometz the minchas chote who for Rabbi Lazar he. That when Rav Dimi came, he quoted the Amora Rabbi Elazar. It's a little confusing, and that when it comes to the kometz of a minchas kote, when it comes to doing that sin, that brisa is Rabbi Elazar the Tana, and so as a result, Abaye has successfully asked the question on Rava, and now Rava realizes he's made a mistake. Hadar Amar Rava then later said, Lav Milsahi da Amri. What I said was wrong. It was nothing. Tanya, because you know what? Now he's going to go in the opposite direction. He's going to say that actually maybe I can prove the opposite. After all, Kodesh Kodeshimhu. There's a brisa that says with respect to the lavona that is brought with the lechem hapanim that it's Kodesh Kodeshim. She'im nifrisa achas mehen chaloseha, that if one of the loaves becomes broken and is incomplete, kulan psulot, they are all invalid. Ha-yatzas, what's the implication? The implication is that if the loaf went out, hi hani deika gavai ksherot. When it comes to being broken, then it's going to be a problem. But if it were to leave the right place, if those loaves were to leave the right place, and remember, as we've seen throughout the Masechet, the loaves of the Lechem Apanim are an example of a mincha offering. And so the loave's location is comparable to whether it's inside, whether a mincha is inside the courtyard or outside the courtyard, and the spoons and the burning of the spoons of the lavona is like the burning of the kometz in connection with the regular mincha. And so here, what do we say? That if it were to have gone out, maybe it would be valid. It's only because it's broken that it's going to be an invalid offering. So man shamas like the amar zrika mo'elis liyotze. And who is it that says that we still do zrika with throwing of blood, which is equivalent to the burning of the spoons of the lavona, and it says that it actually makes a difference and eliminates the problem of me'ila when it comes to a korban, and therefore is going to be valid and still be done with respect to maybe these loaves if they had gone out. Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Akiva. The ka'amar nifrisa lo. And in the end, this brisa, which we're now, according to Rava, attributing to Rabbi Akiva, is telling us that when you have something broke, meaning that when the loaves of the lechem apanim are broken and therefore they're not complete, and that is comparable to a situation where the shirayim is not complete, we're going to say that the sacrifice is not valid and you don't even do anything. And therefore, we would say, according to Rabbi Akiva, he would say that therefore this brisa is a proof to the opinion that we had from Rav Huna, that Rav Huna said that it's not going to work and it's not going to be pigul. So Amar Le Abaye says, no, I'm sorry. Even in the other direction, your proof does not work as well. Because Mikitani Hayatzas, did it specifically tell us that the thing that it was trying to distinguish from when it talked about a broken loaf was if the loaf went out? Dilma ha nitme'es hanak sheros. maybe the thing that is trying to be distinguished is if the lechem hapanim had become tameh, and that in that situation you would still bring the lavona and put the lavona and burn the lavona on the altar. So my time of demuratza sits. And why is it that in that situation we would still be allowed to bring the lavona, even though the lechem apanim had become tamei, and therefore ordinarily you would think would not be allowed? Because when the Kohen Gadol is wearing the tzitz, that tzitz, which is sitting on his head, is enabling him to that it effectively allows acceptance of tame offerings. And even though here the lavona itself is not tame, it's the bread. The lavona is being offered as part of the bread, as part of the full service. We're going to allow it. Aval yatzas lo. But maybe even if the bread went out of the base, the azara, it would still it would not be valid. Meaning, not like Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbi Eliezer. It's Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer says, "The Amar Ains Rika Moelis Liyotze." Remember, he's the one who argues with Rabbi Akiva. Maybe this brisa that you just quoted, Rava, is not actually Rabbi Akiva, but rather it's Rabbi Eliezer. And therefore, uvedinhu di boile lemisne nami yatzas. And you know what? He really could have taught about the lechem apanim going out of the azara.
But what about broken? Only going out? How about
Well,
a broken?
it's explicit about broken, meaning we don't need to say the Bryce itself is talking about broken. The point is that it could have said about going out, and it would have been the same law. Right? The way Rava was proving his point was because it talked about broken. So broken, we say, is puzzle, but maybe going out would be kosher. So therefore, going out, this brisa must be Rabbi Akiva. And so now what Abaye says back to Rava is no, that's the wrong drasha to make. Yes, if it's broken, it's going to be puzzle. But maybe the point is that if it's tame, then it's going to be kosher. And really, if it goes out, it would also be puzzle. So that's this line.
Tummy.
Uvidinhu.
How's it kosher if it's tummy?
What?
How is it kosher if it's tummy?
Because the tzitz, it's again, it's not that it's the kosher means that you can bring the lavona on the altar and burn the lavona. That's what kosher means in this context. And so you can, even though it's tameh, because the Kohen Gadol is wearing the tzitz on his forehead, that provides atonement for tameh sacrifices, and therefore we can still bring the lavona. But both the explicit case that was taught in this brisa, namely if it's broken, and not only that, but even if it were to have gone out of the azara, it would still have the same law that it would be pasul. V'hai dekatani nifrasa. So why did this brisa specifically choose to teach about broken? Meaning there must be something extra that it's trying to tell us. Hakamashmalan. Here's what it's telling us. Dafilu nifrasa. Even when it's broken, de'ise bifnim, even though there's still some that's left in the proper location, it's still going to be kosher. Lo mahanya le haktara. The burning of the lavona is still not going to be effective for it. And so, and that's the position of Rabbi Eliezer and Aval Rabbi Akiva. But when it comes to Rabbi Akiva, Da'amar Zrika Moelis Yotze, he's the one who says that when it comes to throwing the blood for an animal sacrifice, it helps if something went out, even if the meat went out of the azara. So as a result, afilu chisaron nami mahanya haktara. Maybe he would disagree with this entire brisa and say that even if some of the bread were become missing, you would still be allowed to bring the lavona. So Rava, you first tried to prove in one direction, and I showed you it wasn't a proof. And now you tried to prove in the other direction, and I showed you it wasn't a proof. And so as a result, we don't have a proof in either direction. We just know that Rava has retracted his statement, and in the end, effectively, we're left just with Rav Huna's position, which is that even Rabbi Akiva would say that it doesn't work, but we don't have a definitive proof of Rav Huna's position.
And what's the position again?
Rav Huna's position is that if it becomes deficient, and so even though we're supposed to offer the komets on the altar, you can't eat the shirayim, and therefore it's not going to be pigel. It is not a true matir, and therefore, even though when one did the komets or when one did any of the other steps, one had in mind that they were going to eat the shirayim at the wrong time, and so therefore it could potentially be pigel because at the time of the burning of the komets, some of the shirayim went missing, and so now you're no longer going to be able to eat the shirayim. So you can't actually affect the eating that you were thinking about, and therefore it's not going to be considered a fully kosher sacrifice, and therefore it's not going to be a situation where you had a piggle thought and everything else was hunky dory, because everything else wasn't hunky dory, and so therefore we're going to say that that would not be a case of piggle. All right. So
Why
bottom
did
line
they?
is
You brought the case. We brought the Gemara. You brought the case from the Gemara that maybe you were talking about a sinners, a chote, a comets from a chote, right? From a sinner's
that
mincha.
was that was
Well, somewhere in there. I'm wondering why that's not universal. Why bring a specific case from Machota to even as a source of a proof for one way or the other? It's so extreme, so out of line. That's
yeah.
not
So
universal.
the context of bringing up the sinners was to show, right? Rava had tried to use a brisa that was taught by Rabbi Chia in order to prove his case. And what Abaye did was said that, you know what? That brisa that Rabbi Chia taught, maybe it's talking about the narrow case of the sinner's chote, sinner's mincha, and therefore, because it's a sinner's mincha, therefore your entire proof falls away.
Right. It's very
It's
narrow. Exactly. That's my
Yes,
point.
100%. So the point is not, again, if you try to prove something, and I show that there's one element of your proof that doesn't have to be, then I have shown that your proof is not a 100% solid proof. And so that is what Abaye did to Rava. In the end, that proof is not a successful proof. Yes, you may be right. If in fact we could go back in time and ask Rabbi Chia or ask the original author of that brisa, what is the context? Is it a sinner's kote or not? We may be able to better answer. But the bottom line is Abaye was pointing out that because it could be about a sinner's chote, your proof falls away. And not only that, but remember, the Gemara ends up noting that when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he actually taught that the brisa that Rabbi Chia taught was specifically only about a sinner's chote. And so Abaye was right to make to contradict the lesson that Rava was trying to learn.
So it's very limited. And to bring a proof from that is not a
Well,
strong
it's not a
proof.
proof. That's the whole. It's not that. No, the proof isn't what's limited. Remember, what the it's the counter to the proof.
Right. They're counter to the
Abaye's
proof.
effort to counter Rava's proof is to say that case that you thought was broad, it's not broad. It's
No,
limited.
exactly. It's not. If Abayi's quote proof is counter proof is not strong. Is he's showing that the proof that the other brought is not a good proof because I got one. It's very narrow. You don't have
Correct.
enough support.
Correct. Exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly right. It's very narrow. Not a good proof. And not only that, but it turns out that the way that Abaye was trying to show that it's not a good proof is actually supported when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael. All
Yeah.
right, let's see if we can. You know what? We'll pause here. We'll leave it at the Mishnah, and we'll pick up with the God willing, the Mishnah, God willing, over Shabbos. Wishing everybody a very good Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together next week. Please stay safe. If you need help from the Bayit due to the snow, please reach out. Probably by email is best because I don't know whether people in the office will be able to make it to the office. And
It's got to
Again,
be set by next week.
yeah. Oh well. Oh, hopefully by Friday everything will be wonderful.
Today
So,
is
but
Friday.
stay safe and be
What
careful
are you
with the
talking
snow.
about tonight or tomorrow or what are
I'm
we?
talking about the snow that's coming on
I,
Sunday.
well, Sunday
Sunday, big
it's
snow.
well, it's a different story. What do you?
I'm talking about the snow. I'm just saying, please
No,
be safe. I'm not going to be, I'm not having a chance to address you between now, God willing, and Sunday because Ellie's teaching tomorrow and Sunday. So keep an eye out on WhatsApp for exact times. And but I'm just saying, be careful because we're expecting a lot of snow. So want you all to be safe. Have a great Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.